So I think just the sadness of the family having to go through that, get news of that, see that, have that out there going forward. But also to his fans and supporters and followers, I say, as a Muslim American who strongly disagreed or disagrees with Charlie Kirk's views on Islam and on Muslims, even finds much of what he said about Islam to be abhorrent, to be extremely inflammatory, extremely hurtful. I say that, his death and his killing brings me nothing but disappointment and sadness overall. I extend my heartfelt sympathy to people who feel a strong connection to Charlie Kirk, and we'll talk a little bit more about the nuance around that and why I say that, so that you will come to know that it's sincere. Points where I think the vast majority of Muslims in America disagree with Charlie Kirk. I want to hit on those first because I think that you'll be surprised as to how many things we may actually agree on and where the common ground may be. And that's what I want to focus more on ultimately. Hello there. It's the first monologue that I've done in a very long time, and first episode that I am putting out in about a month, really. I apologize to viewers for the delay on getting another episode out. It's just been a really crazy time. Some, late summer travel plans with the family, as well as just a really crazy, hectic work schedule. I do want to bring up one thing, which is that some people may have noticed that the channel was down for a little bit, like about a week ago or so. The channel was accidentally or erroneously removed by, I think, YouTube's algorithm that goes through and automatically sifts through channels and content on YouTube. And for some reason, it was flagged and it was deactivated as having violated some kind of spam policy, which really didn't make any sense. So long story short, I managed to quickly clear it up with YouTube, and they pretty much immediately restored the account to being active and having all of the channel and the associated, emails and things that were attached to it being fully reactivated. So thankful for that. I do apologize, though, for there being a delay since the last episode with Dr. Ibrahim Barhuma. There hasn't been, much activity on the channel, and it's just like I said, again, very busy time of the year, super busy with work, and then also the disruption with the channel being deactivated kind of sent me into a panic, as you can imagine. And so I just had to get all that stuff kind of worked through before I could get back up to putting out stuff on a more regular basis. So with that, I do want to remind people to please subscribe to the channel before we get started, and just make sure to hit the subscribe button at the bottom. You see under, for those who are not familiar, under every YouTube video, if you see where the actual boxes where you see the content, there's a subscribe button. Kind of next to where the share button is and the like button is. Please subscribe to the channel and choose at least one episode from my channel that resonates with you or has some meaning to you or benefit, and please share it with your friends and family or whatever on social media. It really does help keep the channel moving forward and getting more visibility. So for today, what I'd like to talk about during this monologue is really just my reaction as a Muslim American, as a human being, and maybe even to a degree, maybe as a representative of the Muslim American community, on the issue of Charlie Kirk's killing or assassination that occurred just a few days ago. The reason why I wanted to put this out is because I do feel like with all the content that I've seen, there are some points that just have not been made or have not been presented from a Muslim American perspective that I think can really do a lot of good and kind of ground the conversation in more of reality rather than just kind of the extreme rhetoric that I've been seeing online, and try to just cool the temperature down a little bit, and get people who are hopefully the adults in the room to kind of see things in a much more nuanced, more accurate way, in my opinion. So first, I just want to start off by sharing my general reaction to the killing of Charlie Kirk. I'll say, first and foremost, I was shocked. I was shocked at the sight of such, wanton violence taking place in the United States of America, especially on a campus. It was absolutely shocking to me that this is something that now, with our technology and our, media ecosystem, the ability for everyone to have a phone and hold it up, and things happen in live time and they get picked up really in 4K essentially, and then quickly disseminated across the globe, is really something that I don't think any of us are still like fully capable of adjusting to, or haven't adjusted to rather. Not that you really ever should hopefully adjust to something like that being recorded or shown right in front of you in HD. But I think the shock of it, of course, like most people, can't be overstated. The other piece of it, though, which is kind of interesting to me, is there kind of was a sense of not being surprised. I as someone who has listened to a lot of Charlie Kirk's content over the years, I really wasn't that surprised at some level, which kind of sounds weird maybe, but it's the honest truth. I kind of predicted that someone with his maybe virality, as well as controversial topics and kind of method or tone of addressing them, could end up being the subject of violence, political violence, whatever you want to call it, at some point in the future, just given how crazy the overall, tenor and overall vibe is these days when it comes to, the division and the political landscape in the United States and in the West in general. Really, the video, as far as the immediate close up where he gets hit and there's just an incredible amount of blood just gushing out of his neck and stuff. I mean, the only thing that I could compare it to is probably the horrific videos that have been coming out of Gaza over the last 2 years. Those who are paying attention to this issue, the issue of Gaza, have seen, literally HD, 4K, whatever you want to call it, videos of absolutely some of the most horrific things imaginable. And so it really was just the shock of seeing something like that in the United States that I think, and on a campus, that I think was so just unbelievable and just jolting. The other thing that I would say I felt is disgusted. I think a lot of us are at this place where we're disgusted by the direction that America is headed, or has been heading down, where disagreement and political debate are met with violence, where a campus, for example, where I went to, a large, state university, and I had my own campus debate experiences growing up and going through that as a young man, where, you debate someone about religion, for example, and it'd be like a free speech zone in front of the public, the campus library. And people would aggregate there, they'd have lunch, and then all of a sudden you'd get someone like a Christian pastor, local person getting up and talking about, the word of Jesus Christ. And then you'd get people debating, and I would engage in a lot of those debates. They were stimulating, they were interesting. You learned a lot about other people. You formed friendships, you met people at these debates. It was very, very transformative and very overall, I think, enriching in terms of an experience. And I think for us to go from that environment, which was very much pre-social media, pre what the internet is today, in terms of my timing in college, I think Facebook, the first Facebook launch for our university was in 2006. So that gives you a sense of time. And to go from that campus debate experience, having known it, having lived through it and loved it, to where campus discussion or debate of ideas turns to something violent and is met with, with murder, really is just disgusting. And I think it reemphasizes for all of us in America the importance of free thought, debate, discourse, and of course, freedom of speech. no matter how much you disagree with that speech. I think it's just disgusting to see the turn that our country has taken in terms of these not being able to be held peacefully and in a way that's productive and maintains the basic boundaries of preserving human life. Also saddened, I think, is another reaction. I'm saddened, of course, for his family, wife and kids, to have that horrific public death, assassination, murder that will be out there in the public space for possibly the rest of their lives forever, unless some super algorithm in the future can kind of comb the internet and never allow that stuff to be shown. But I think there'll always be, some kind of way in which people could look up a video and see it. So I think just the sadness of the family having to go through that, get news of that, see that, have that out there going forward. But also to his fans and supporters and followers, I say, as a Muslim American who strongly disagreed or disagrees with Charlie Kirk's views on Islam and on Muslims, even finds much of what he said about Islam to be abhorrent, to be extremely inflammatory, extremely hurtful. I say that, his death and his killing brings me nothing but disappointment and sadness overall. I extend my heartfelt sympathy to people who feel a strong connection to Charlie Kirk, and we'll talk a little bit more about the nuance around that and why I say that, so that you will come to know that it's sincere. I think the last couple of things I felt, one was disappointment in how our leadership class has not really led or lived up to their responsibilities. Choosing to fan the flames, polarize the country, use divisive rhetoric instead of calming things down and lowering the temperature in the room. I think right now what we desperately need, and what a lot of us recognize, is we need the adults in the room, the level-headed people who are kind of like the 90% of society, not the fringe groups, not the online, crazies, the extreme, political, animals. We don't need those people leading us and leading the conversation right now. We need the adults in the room to take control, to put their hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and to really help steer our society, our country, and really even globally, like Western society, as well as, internationally, with everything that's going on course. Given the unleashing of algorithm technology and the way the internet works in really just polarizing and making people feel like they're less and less connected and less sharing something in common with each other as citizens of even the same country or city sometimes. Same goes for podcasters, online politicos, others. We need a restoration of sanity to all conversations, and to just approach conversations, I think, with more respect and dignity and care. Not out of, trying to infringe on people's freedom of speech or but I think there's a way to have conversations, right? There's the way that you absolutely could say something under your rights, under the law and under the Constitution. But then there's also something different, which is the way in which we try to convince the other side and win people over, and using wisdom, right? Using techniques and methods and wisdom and that kind of thing to really, what's the ultimate goal? If you are someone who has a political view, a religious view, a policy view, whatever it might be, right? Something you want to implement as a leader in a business or in a company, your goal is to convince people. Your goal should be to get people to, buy into your ideas and want to, jump on board, be part of the team or part of that project moving forward towards some, goal that you've outlined to make hopefully the world a better place, right? In general, I'm speaking high level. And so in order to do that, right, you could say, well, freedom of speech allows me to say X, or freedom of speech allows me to say Y. I think that's very much true, and I think freedom of speech definitely should be protected, of course, and it's more important now than ever. However, I do think that given the landscape that we all recognize, that we live in with the online aspect, the algorithm aspect, the siloing of people in their own kind of echo chambers and bubbles, we need to be careful that the way in which we engage is actually not just to dunk or score points or insult people and be inflammatory, because that's really not going to produce the result we want. Going back to my outlining of this, as we would want to convince people of our ideas to be able to have more consensus and get to those ideas being implemented. we really need to bring the temperature down and speak in a way that appeals to people's hearts, that isn't about, making them feel degraded or dunked on, but rather, recognizes what their views are, maybe where they're at in the conversation, whether it has to do with their own knowledge level, their own maturity level, maybe their own life experience is just different than yours or ours or whoever's. And we need to be able to convince them. And to do that, usually you get more using honey, as they say, or sugar than you do, with something like, an insult or a dunk or trying to, score points or make someone feel stupid. So you definitely attract more with honey or with sugar. And so that would be my appeal, is just we've got to try to find a way that's more wise and responsible in terms of how we have some of these conversations that are very much, to a lot of people, controversial and close to their heart. And so it's that much easier to really do a lot of harm, do a lot of damage, and really undermine your overall effort if you're not careful. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of reaction, there's so many emotions, but these were the main ones that I just wanted to share with you all, is a sense of relief. I know this is going to sound crazy, but stay with me for a second. The relief sense was from not having this incident be way worse. I really was relieved to see that it wasn't a mass casualty event where someone was perched up high above and just started shooting and killing as many people as possible before the police or SWAT team gets to them and kills them. We've seen that happen too many times in America and other parts of the world, but a lot and most of the time in America. And we really don't, the worst thing that would have made this even more horrific and terrible, which it already was and is, would be a mass casualty event where you had, tons of young people on a college campus getting gunned down for their political views. So I am relieved and thankful. There's always a tiny bit of, being grateful and being thankful, even in the worst of situations. That would be my kind of take on that. I do have a few messages that I want to share with you all. I do encourage you to please listen to this till the end. I think there's some information here that for most people who are not familiar with the way Muslims interpret Charlie Kirk, or the legacy of Charlie Kirk, if you want to call it that, and the aftermath of his murder, I think you'll find some of this information very interesting, different than maybe what you've been exposed to, and potentially positive in terms of moving our country in a better direction. So first, I want to say to those who are celebrating this horrific killing and murder, I want to say that you need to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself about your basic human decency and humanity. No matter how much we disagree or even hate someone's views, it does not justify cold-blooded murder. And this is exactly what it was. It was either a political assassination or, whatever you want to call it in terms of the politics behind it. But it was cold-blooded murder, right? It's someone taking a decision into their own hands and deciding that someone else's life doesn't, deserve to continue, and being kind of judge, jury, and executioner, all for something that someone's saying, right? So there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about this. I really do not think that you can justify celebratory, notions or celebratory remarks. And I think that people need to understand, most likely these are very angered people who are, seriously in disagreement with Charlie Kirk's views. He had some very controversial positions and said a lot of controversial stuff. And I think that most of those people will probably come around to understand that this is really the way of darkness, to be celebrating someone being killed like that publicly. But for those of us who are more sane, the adults in the room, I think we just need to also have a degree of understanding that these people are just extremely angry and possibly even hateful as to the person's viewpoints, and feel like he was spreading really hurtful and negative and destructive things that concern them. And therefore, there's a sense, I'm sure, among those people of like, well, I'm not losing too much sleep over it, or those kinds of remarks of like, well, hey, it goes around, comes around, or live by the sword, die by the sword kind of stuff I've seen online. But if we are trying to be adults and wise and have, grace and understanding and decency, I really don't think that's the direction that you should conclude in terms of after you've given it some thought. If you hate someone's views, you should want more than anything, like I said before, we should want more than anything to win people over by convincing them or their supporters of your alternative or alternate viewpoint, and win the battle of ideas, not turn to violence. And to those on the other hand, the other end, who would seek to use this as a pretext for something terrible, out of a sense of like Charlie Kirk's killing being the only thing that matters, I say, perhaps reflect on the overall message of Christianity, of Jesus Christ, and consider what true wisdom and virtue would demand rather than turning to the voices of darkness. Christians believe that men are saved by grace and that all God's children are deserving of mercy. Let that be your guide during this difficult time. I don't say that in terms of, trying to obfuscate justice being served to the person, or if it's more of like a conspiracy or there are people behind the actual person who committed this act. It's still very early on. They've got a suspect. We don't know too many details, or in terms of who are they connected to. Is it a bigger plot? All that stuff will come out, I'm sure, in the coming days, weeks, or maybe it won't. Maybe it's a cover up and it is a big conspiracy. But more to come on that. But for the time being, I think what we need to understand is that justice does need to be served, of course. But at the same time, in terms of mercy and grace, I'm saying we need to start seeing other people on the other sides of any political, religious, philosophical, intellectual debate as human beings and as people who just hold a different point of view, and working, I think, as Charlie Kirk, I think his supporters and people who are really fans of his would say, working like he did to try to convince people using reasoning and logic and debate rather than turning to violence and trying to exact revenge on the wokies or the lefties or the libs or whatever it might be. We really need to avoid that path as much as possible right now as a country. Points where I think the vast majority of Muslims in America disagree with Charlie Kirk. I want to hit on those first because I think that you'll be surprised as to how many things we may actually agree on and where the common ground may be. And that's what I want to focus more on ultimately. But I just want to bring up some points, some general positions that Charlie Kirk, publicly held, and talk a little bit about where me as a Muslim first, I'll talk for myself, but where I think I would be kind of in line with the majority of Muslims in America in terms of overall analysis or assessment of those points and how they might feel. I am not claiming to be like the one voice, the Muslim community. This is something that actually is a big disagreement that I have and others have with Charlie Kirk's characterization of Muslims as being kind of this like monolithic, the Islamist kind of framing of us being this monolithic group that holds the same views as, some fringe group in some foreign country, and saying like, well, that's what American Muslims are like, and that's what all Muslims are like. And nothing could be further from the truth. It's not monolithic. There's so much diversity of opinion and so much, richness in terms of the intellectual scholarship, interpretation, political understanding in the Muslim world. It's insane. I mean, it needs its own podcast, multiple episodes, just to be able to frame it. But I'll just jump into some of these and give you a sense of what I'm talking about. But please just, recognize that I'm not a scholar. This is one man's humble opinion as an American Muslim, just sharing my thoughts. So one of the things that Charlie Kirk used to say, or famously said, is the greatest threats to America and American values or the American way of life is wokeism and Islamism. And he also mentioned at the end of some of those statements, mentioned like doing the call to prayer, the Muslim call to prayer, the adhan, on a loudspeaker as a metaphor of some kind of like Muslim takeover of American cities or American places, spaces and places of life. And so I just want to give you some points to think about when it comes to this, because nothing could be further from the truth, truly. Only 1.1 to 1.3% of America is Muslim, or identifies as Muslim. So you're talking about a country of 330 some, whatever it is, million people, and 1.1 or 1.3% of America is Muslim. So in what universe do you think it is likely that, 1.1 to 1.3% of the population is going to take over and institute some kind of Islamist agenda, Sharia law, force other people to adhere to like a Muslim way of life? I mean, it's just absolutely not true. Not out of disrespect to Charlie Kirk or to his followers, but I'm just trying to be real with you. Like as an insider, as a Muslim, a practicing Muslim who was raised in Muslim communities, who knows how conversations occur at mosques across the country, nothing could be further from the truth. Like if anything, yes, Muslims, would they love to see other people become Muslim, just like Christians would love to see other people become Christian? 100%. Absolutely. I'm not going to deny that. But to think that like American Muslims have like some kind of agenda to take over, like all we can hope for right now or think about right now, honestly, is just as being such a minority in this country is like, hey, could we possibly have representation in our local, government, local city, town government, state government, and nationally have a few people who are in Congress maybe that are Muslim to just bring up the issues that are near and dear to our hearts and have representation, right? Have a voice. But as far as trying to, take over and change the system and all this stuff, like forget the fact that it's not even true from our perspective. Like that's not the goal or agenda at all. That's never the topic of conversation in our smaller circles. It's also just absolutely inconceivably infeasible, right, for this to ever occur in the United States. And I mean, it just doesn't make sense, right? Such a small minority having any kind of threat or any kind of real weight or clout in terms of changing the overall system. Now, so please just understand that this is a fear-mongering thing that I think people implanted somewhere in the discussion, in the culture, in the conversation online to try to get people afraid of Muslims. I think a lot of it personally, my take is that it comes from kind of political forces outside the United States that have always used this as a way to try to scare the West and scare Americans into supporting their kind of crazy policies, foreign policy-wise, militarism-wise, in other countries, other parts of the world. I think there's a connection there that really does hold true if you study it. However, just in general, from like a cultural or like a people-to-people perspective, Muslims want the same thing as other people. They want the American dream. The majority of Muslims, they come to the United States. A lot of them who are refugees, or are, coming here without like a lot of money, which is the majority. They come here, they work rough jobs for years. They're bus boys. They start out, a lot of them doing construction, doing like just rough and tough kind of manual labor jobs. And the ones who are the educated elite of their countries come here broke with not a nickel to their name. And they really start, in like these master's and PhD programs across the United States in engineering and in the sciences, because for them, their ticket out of their countries and to a better life was education. It was everything. Their families probably poured the majority of their energy and money and resources into their kids' education. And in doing so, the dream was that they get a visa to go to some foreign country and be able to do a PhD and then land a great job, get sponsored for their visa, for their green card, and then be able to ultimately settle in those countries and have a better quality of life for them and their families. So that's the vast majority. The American dream is something that Muslims pursue heavily. We'll talk about this. I don't say this kind of like to be insulting to the Muslim community, but like I'm just being real with y'all. The Muslim community like loves the American dream, right? We love the big house in a nice new enclave or little neighborhood. We love having a nice car, Lexus, Mercedes. Chase your dream, right? Live the American dream. Have a business that's thriving and bustling and successful. Reach that top C-suite level job at a company like Microsoft or Amazon or whatever. Like those are what the majority of Muslims in America are chasing after and are pursuing. Now, at the same time, a lot of them are some of the most giving, charitable, just practicing amazing Muslims that you'll ever meet as far as people of faith. I'm not saying that, they're all just like money hungry, materialistic. I'm not trying to paint that picture, but I'm just saying, there's a balance, right? So on one hand, they do a lot of their, charity and they give tons of money to all kinds of noble causes. They're incredibly selfless, incredibly sacrificing, incredibly loyal, peaceful, hardworking, great neighbors, all that stuff. And at the same time, they're chasing the dream just like anyone else, right? Nowadays, trying to get themselves to a higher position and climb that economic, status ladder. Non-Muslims who live in Muslim enclaves, like for example, in Chicago, I used to live in a kind of a really little Muslim enclave that had it was kind of off a main road and there was a big mosque, the main mosque in our area down here. in Little Palestine. Shout out to the Mosque Foundation. And there's like a community where like all the houses, all the people living around that mosque are all Muslim. And I lived back in some apartments back there a while when I was kind of new to Chicago, the Chicagoland area. And we had like 2 neighbors, and like I'm talking about hundreds of people lived in this little enclave area. And they all, bought their houses, paid premiums for them because they were great houses and were close to the mosque and, nice, peaceful little area away from all the hustle and bustle of our HaRLeM Street and our other busy roads. And so these 2 non-Muslims who lived in those areas would not sell their homes. Like I had talked to an old lady who lived there, and I was like, how long have you lived there? She'd lived there for many, many years. And she's like, I'm never selling. Like I'm going to die. I'm going to die in this place or go to a nursing home from this place. And she loved the neighborhood. Like the neighbors, she said, it's so safe. The kids play outside. It's like Sandlot in the 1950s, like the way the Sandlot movie portrayed growing up in that era. It was like everyone running around on bikes and playing soccer and getting up to shenanigans before dinner time when their parents call them back in to have dinner. Just a lot of family values, a lot of that kind of safe space for kids to play and not have a fear of anything bad happening. And she's like, I'm never leaving. Like, I love this place. And so I just want to give people a sense that like it's a Muslim enclave, and people who are non-Muslim enjoy living in those spaces because there's just such a great community and neighborhood where those Muslims live. And also, we share so many values in common. I'll hit on these in a few minutes in more detail. But this idea of like, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I want to touch on this mosque, a call to prayer thing that Charlie Kirk would famously say. Like only a tiny handful of mosques play the adhan, the call to prayer, on the loudspeaker. And I'm literally like, you could probably count the mosques in the United States on like 1 or 2 hands out of all the thousands of mosques that probably are out there. And it's mostly in like these Muslim enclave areas, like I described, where it's heavily populated by Muslims. Muslims buy property there in order to be close to each other and close to the mosque because there's 5 daily prayers. So it's not like church where you maybe go like on Sunday and maybe a mass or a couple things during the week for like Bible study. Muslims like who are living close to the mosque can go 5 times a day and do their 5 daily prayers at the mosque. So people will pay a premium in a city where there are a lot of Muslims competing for that space in order to be next to the mosque. And part of that is like, hey, it'd be nice to hear the adhan, the call to prayer, right? So I feel like I'm more connected to the mosque. And so these are things that happen very infrequently. It's not taking over America to disturb everyone's peace and tranquility or to, impose Islam on people in some way. And they're always passed in terms of city ordinances. There are city ordinances that forbid like loud noise over a speaker like that at different times of day or whatever. These things that do occur legally under city ordinances that are allowing for it. And so I would encourage people to take a look at the details and not just, run this story of fear and being like, convinced that there's some kind of takeover of your normal American life that's happening in terms of noise pollution because of some other religion. Like really, that's not what it is. And again, and if you don't like it, if you really feel strongly that you don't want adhan or 5 daily prayers to ever be on a loudspeaker or whatever, this is a country of democracy and of law and of order and of people framing and building the communities and the society that they want through their own involvement in politics. Try to look into it and see, hey, next time a vote comes up, vote against it, right? But this notion that you have to turn to some kind of like darker path or there has to be some demonization or violence, God forbid, because of, the call to prayer. It's just, it scares me, it worries me, but it's also just dangerous rhetoric. And it's false. It's not really the path in terms of what needs to happen if you feel strongly against it. I do want to give people kind of a different story that maybe what they've been told about Muslims and how Muslims deal with non-Muslims, especially Christians, because that's been a topic that I think has been really heating up online given what's happening in Palestine and Gaza, some of the stuff that's happened around Christian Palestinians being killed in the violence that's occurring in the war, in the ethnic cleansing campaign that has been occurring in the West Bank as well as the Gaza Strip. There have been stories, Tucker Carlson's covered a lot of this, Candace Owens, other people as well, at Christian churches being bombed and Christians being abused. spat on, being infringed upon in terms of their basic rights and freedom of access and movement in the Holy Land. I want to give you a story that, just real briefly, you can look up the details online, of course, of one of the caliphs who came after Muhammad died. His name was Omar. He was Omar ibn al-Khattab is the way he's pronounced in Arabic, Omar ibn al-Khattab. In English, you say Omar ibn al-Khattab. He was basically, a companion of the Prophet Muhammad, as Muslims believe, and who later on ended up being one of the key rulers for a short period of time after Muhammad's death. And as far as political rulers over the very early Muslim, community or small kingdom that was starting to emerge. And he was also known in Muslim lore and Muslim kind of literature as being kind of one of more of like a hardliner. Like, I think any Muslim who denies that is kind of kidding themselves. The persona of Omar, I should say, has always been that he's kind of this like tough, hardline, super, no BS, no, say lack of a better term, intimidating figure that really takes the law of Islam, the legal jurisprudence and kind of like Sharia law that you hear about, which isn't the fake Sharia law that the media tries to scare you about, but actually the real Sharia law, and implement it as fairly and as honestly and as rigidly as possible without being influenced by forces of other people trying to get him to do something wrong, or by corruption or by nepotism. He was very much against that stuff. Like, he was looked at as being a very fair, extremely fair and, protective of that justice concept type of ruler. And so there's a story of when Omar and the early Muslims actually reconquered Jerusalem after a very long period of time, right? And after the army kind of got control of the city of Jerusalem, and under the command of a guy named Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, it was in 637 CE, and the patriarch Sophronius, who was the patriarch of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, refused to surrender to anyone but the Caliph Omar himself. And so Omar arrived in the city and accepted its surrender. While at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the patriarch Sophronius invited Omar to pray inside the sacred site. Now, he probably invited him to pray as a gesture of goodwill. Perhaps it was a gesture of submission, saying like, there's no fight here, please don't destroy the church or don't cause any harm to the Christian population. Whatever that was, it was definitely intended to bring about, obviously, something good, right? And so Omar refused, actually. He politely declined the invitation to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. He declined the invitation, and a decision was rooted in his desire to protect the church's status as a Christian place of worship. So this is a famous story that we were taught as kids. Muslims in America and outside of America were taught this. You hear people, Muslims sitting around at night who talk about like Muslim-Christian relations will talk about this, saying like, see, the media is demonizing us when this is who we really are. And so this is why I want to share this story with you all. Omar feared that if he prayed inside the church, future Muslims might use his act as a justification to build a mosque there. And that would basically mean like a takeover of the church into a mosque. And that would infringe on Christians' religious freedom and the church's sanctity from the Christian perspective. And so the outcome of this was actually that Omar chose to pray outside the church on the steps east of the entrance. And this is the location where Omar prayed later, became a site of a mosque named Masjid Omar, like the Mosque of Omar, or the Mosque of Omar, built in the 12th century to commemorate the event. So this highlights his commitment, Omar's and Muslims' commitment to religious tolerance through the Pact of Omar, as it was called, a charter that protected the rights of Christians and Jewish citizens, allowing them to practice their faith and be judged by their own laws. So this is something that you probably never hear, right? Like on mainstream media. And so I wanted to just share that interesting story with you all. And this is where Muslims are much more aligned in terms of their thinking when it comes to relations with other religions. It's not the fear-mongering, take over everyone and subjugate and kill kind of stuff that you hear online. It's just absolutely not the case. And that's really nothing more than people taking a few verses out of context and trying to run wild with them and paint in broad strokes and just make everything seem like it's bleak and evil and terrible when it's not. Islam is also, one thing that Charlie Kirk had said previously also that we disagree with vehemently is that Islam is incompatible with Western life. Incompatible with Western life. And again, this is false. My question would be what aspect of Western life? Like Western life is such a broad term, right? But are we talking about free society? Are we talking about capitalism? Muslims are some of the greatest, most successful, incredible capitalists you could ever imagine. Is it work ethic? Muslims, again, especially those that come to the United States, are some of the most hardworking people you've ever seen in your life. Business owners, hustlers, people who are like rough and tough, trying to make a deal, busting their butt, putting in 12, 13, 14-hour days. A lot of them will only take one day off a week. It's kind of part of the culture from the Middle East is like, there's really one day off truly. It's not 2-day weekends like we have in the United States historically. So they're just really, really tough workers, like incredible work ethic. American dream, what is it that Islam is incompatible with? We already talked about the American dream. I challenge you to look up, statistics on American Muslims and their ability, like socioeconomically, to move up the ladder. They're some of the most successful people with, great houses, nice neighborhoods, great colleagues, relations with their colleagues in companies and in workplaces. They end up being leaders. There really is not any credence to this as far as, them being against the American dream, let's say. Is it free worship? We already talked a lot about free worship. I just gave a great example of the concept that Muslims have in terms of respecting and making sure that there's a sanctity behind other people's rights to worship in their own way for their religion. Is it being neighborly? Is it not being good citizens of the country? All that stuff you could look up simply and see that it's false. Like Muslims are incredible American citizens, very productive, very pay their taxes, highly contributing to the fabric of America. Private property, we're huge on private property. We have more OCD about personal privacy because of some of the ways in which Muslim women dress, and Muslim women prefer like their private setting in their homes to be able to enjoy themselves without being covered with a headscarf or whatever, and without other prying eyes being able to see them. So privacy is like a paramount thing. Personal privacy of your home for American Muslims. Second Amendment, even that, I would say there are Muslims who are very much progressive, and a lot of America's Muslim community is more like I'd say Democrat voting because I think of foreign policy issues and concerns about, kind of like I'd say blind support for Israel that kind of drives a wedge, and the foreign policy blunders of the Bush administration that drives a wedge between like the American Muslim community and the right or conservatives when it comes to foreign policy and politics and voting. However, when it comes to the Second Amendment, there's kind of like different classes of Muslims. I would say like the educated elite class of Muslims who are, people who just never had exposure to guns growing up in their home countries, or maybe even in the United States, who are more city Muslims that live in large cities, maybe more like in favor of gun control and more like Democrat aligned around the issue of the Second Amendment. However, for a large group of Muslims who are more working class, I would say more blue collar, who also live in cities, but maybe not like in downtown swanky areas, but more, are dealing with like the rough and tough of, restaurant ownership, business ownership, being a landscaper, HVACer, working odd hours of the night. A lot of these people have concealed carry and love the Second Amendment protection and afforded to them, and the idea of having a concealed carry that's legal and everything, that they can stay safe when they're out there engaging with other people in the community and at odd hours of the day where they may be feeling like vulnerable or under threat potentially, and being able to have that weapon to defend themselves. Consent to the governed. I mean, there are so many examples from early Islamic history of, even Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, he intentionally, from our view, didn't declare someone to be like his successor, as far as like appointing someone from his family and saying like, I'm a kingship essentially, like now my son will be the leader, and it'll be this kind of way we see that kingdoms operate. He didn't do that. He actually ended up leaving a large opening for consent by the governed, right? And so Muslims have no problem with that whatsoever. Actually, we prefer it strongly. We don't have enough democracy. We don't have enough consent by the governed occurring in the Muslim world because of a lot of the authoritarian regimes and autocracies that exist. And so we're very much hungry for actually more democracy and more freedom. And also, there are so many falsehoods. It's really hard to fully cover all of them. So you've been just given, I can say, is you've been given a characterization of Muslims that is just absolutely terrible, most likely. And so I'm trying to do a little bit to try to turn that back and give you a different perspective. So what I want to do is bring a few examples from the actual Quran, because I think that you sometimes hear verses taken out of context in the Quran as far as like, kill the infidels or kill them wherever you find them. You find these couple verses that people quote and turn it into something that it absolutely isn't. And what I want to do is paint a better picture of that that's more accurate and in line with Islam in general, and also the way Muslims feel and interpret their religion, which is very important. Because there is a difference between like what a religion or a group professes versus what they do. And I think that there is alignment in Islam between what the theory is and what people actually believe. I think the disconnect sometimes is that our mainstream media and our government, with, I think, personal take is like deep state, CIA / military industrial complex reasons and intentions and justifications, tries to paint it as being something completely different in order to just keep getting unlimited funding for these forever wars. That's my take. You can do your own research on that. But there's also this notion that Charlie Kirk used to give out that like Islam is not compatible with freedom of speech, and that Islam is not compatible with freedom of religion. And so I want to just give some examples of how that's just not true at all. Bear with me one second, please. So I want to give you some verses from the Quran, just 10 in English. I'm not going to read the Arabic. I'll give the verse number and you can look it up. That really just gives a different picture, right? And should give you a sense of like Islam. And you hear about Islam being peaceful and peace and stuff like that. And some people who are kind of, I think in the Christian conservative community, roll their eyes thinking that it's not true, but it really is. And so I'll give you some of those verses right now. This is chapter 2, verse 256. There shall be no compulsion in religion, like meaning acceptance of religion. The right course has become clear from the wrong, meaning the information, the argument of why this is true has been laid out. You will choose it based on that or you won't. That's kind of, in a sense, what it's saying. It's a choice, freedom of choice. I'll give you another one, chapter 5, verse 32. If anyone kills a person, unless in retaliation for murder or spreading corruption in the land, meaning like a legal system where there's a judge and a jury and or whatever, evidence is brought forth and a murderer is caught and then tried and found guilty and then executed for that crime, or spreading corruption in the land, meaning some other category of crime where maybe someone is, like a serious drug dealing or some other crimes that could be capital crimes that involve capital punishment. It says, it is as if he kills all mankind, meaning if you kill someone in an unjustifiable way, it is as if he kills all mankind. While if anyone saves a life, it is as if he saves all mankind. Another example, chapter 8, verse 61. But if they incline to peace, meaning the ones who are showing animosity and harboring violence towards Muslims, especially the early Muslim community when Islam was first spreading, God says, we believe God says, but if they incline to peace, you must also incline to it and put your trust in God. Meaning if they choose the path of peace with you, seek peace with them. Like don't try to be at forever animosity and forever war with people just because they're different than you. That's not at all the Islamic concept. It's very much the opposite. It's like war is only a last choice. It's only if you absolutely have to use it for self-protection and preservation, not to just, try to use it as a way to commit injustice and persecute people. Chapter 2, verse 208. O believers, enter all together into peace and do not follow in the footsteps of Satan, for he is your sworn enemy. Chapter 10, verse 25, God calls to the home of peace and guides whoever he wills to a straight path. Chapter 49, verse 13, O humanity, we have created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples and tribes that you may know each other. Meaning, we've created you with these differences, cultural differences, dress differences, different practices, different races, all that stuff, in order for you to to know one another, to have a more enriched experience getting to know one another. And also there's another verse where God says, from our perspective, so that you will understand that the best of you is the one who is the most God-fearing, meaning all the color differences, all the clothing differences, cultural differences, food differences don't really matter at the end of the day. What matters is the content of someone's character, to go to Dr. Martin Luther King. And we find also chapter 25, verse 63, the servants of the most compassionate are those who walk on the earth humbly, and when the ignorant address them, they respond with peace. Chapter 2, verse 190, and fight in the way of God those who fight you, but do not transgress. Indeed, God does not love transgressors, meaning, going beyond the boundaries of what's reasonable and acceptable in a warfare scenario. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of what that means. Chapter 6, verse 151, do not take any human life which God has made sacred except in the course of justice, meaning capital crime punishment. If someone killed someone, there is a space in Islam where we believe that someone could be deserving of a capital punishment for certain crimes. And then the last one here is that I'll give. There's so many more, but I just chose these kind of like random 10. Chapter 49, verse 9, O believers, if a rebellious group fights another, then make peace between them. Try to reconcile and try to make peace. So you see this theme like running throughout these, very famous, known verses from the Quran. And now I'm going to give you just a few examples from the Prophet Muhammad, from the prophetic tradition, as we call it in English, where he talks about rules of combat, right? So there are very strict rules to combat that were established, and the bullets of them, you can look into the details, are do not act with treachery, disloyalty, or mutilation. So respect the sanctity of life in terms of even if life is ended, don't mutilate bodies, be respectful as they were human beings and they have families and loved ones and they're worthy of more than that. Do not harm children, women, or old men. Do not destroy trees. Do not burn fruit palms or slaughter livestock unless for food, meaning you can't just go on a campaign of destruction where you wipe out every single living thing, growing thing, because you want to make the land barren and unuseful for anyone ever in the future. Do not attack monks or priests, meaning there's certain classes of people that are deemed kind of non-combatants that are like specially non-combatants that should not be touched as people of clergy and people of religious authority. So I just want to give you some a sense of what Islam actually says versus kind of some of the stuff that you may hear online. And then another final example that I'll give is the Prophet Muhammad, when he entered, famously entered a city it's called Ta'if, and that city was a very difficult time in terms of proselytizing and spreading the message of Islam. And instead of welcoming him, the city's inhabitants rejected his message, mocked him, and they set their children to pelt him with stones until he was wounded and humiliated. And after leaving that town, we believe that the angel Gabriel appeared to him and offered to basically, by God's command, like wipe out the entire city between the two mountains as punishment. And Muhammad rejected the offer. It was kind of like this conversation occurring that gives us an insight into like God is, his justice is there and he's willing to do certain things kind of in I'd say what Christians would consider like the Old Testament sense. But then there's like this sense of like, what does Muhammad want to do in terms of his wisdom and patience and overall adherence to the greater mission, right? Which is to spread the word of God and basically try to get people to follow Islam and not, the goal isn't to just, wipe people out. And so the prophet basically said in praying, right, to God, he said, I rather hope that God will raise from among their descendants people who will worship him and not associate partners with him, meaning from them will come a nation of believers or a group of believers in God. Also, there's the famous conquest of Mecca when Muhammad entered Mecca after being expelled for many, 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 many years and persecuted heavily, him and his followers. They finally triumphed and entered with 10,000 strong, army soldiers. And when they entered, they said, you're all free. You're all free to go. Like a lot of these people were people who confiscated and took property from the early Muslim believers. They're people who heavily, kind of like similar to like early Christian persecution that we hear about under the Romans, some terrible acts of torture, violence, killing, stealing people's property, raping, all kinds of terrible acts done by these people against the early Muslims. And after years of this and decades of this, the Muslims entered the city of Mecca on the strong end, right? Having all the power and being able to basically do whatever they wanted. If they wanted to create a bloodbath, they could have. And actually, that's not what happened, because that's not what Islam and Muslims are about in reality. Now, some of you might say, well, how come there's violence in Muslim countries today? How come there's, all kinds of crazy stuff going on you hear about in Nigeria, Africa? Choose a country, right? And you could say, well, there's Muslims doing this or Muslims doing that. I would just push back saying, like, you can do that to any group and say, there have been a lot of violent acts and terrible things done by Christians in the 20th century, even until this day in parts of the world. Our Jewish brothers and sisters across the aisle have their blood on their hands for different things in history. Any group you can point to is my point, atheists, communists, you name it, right? There are people who have done terrible things that do not align with the overall professed values of their religion or of their culture. But for some reason, humans are capable of terrible things, which is why we all, I believe, need God and need God, having a sense of being God-fearing and not allowing ourselves to succumb to all that or go down that path. So people are capable of violence. All people are capable of terrible acts. It's not something that's unique to non-Muslims or unique to Muslims. But I just want to clarify that this is not the value. This is not the goal or the objective that we should be striving for. And so there's a difference between saying Muslims are capable of evil, just like anyone's capable of evil, versus saying that Islam and Muslims as an ideology or a people are just uniquely, susceptible or guilty of evil or something like that, which is absolutely not true. A couple other areas real quick, and then we'll conclude where we disagree heavily with Charlie Kirk disagreed with him was Palestine. So I don't want to get into every detail on this because it's a topic I've covered at length in previous podcast episodes. I encourage you to check them out if you want to get some really good information that's a different perspective than maybe you've seen or been exposed to. But he kind of pretended as if famously Palestine doesn't exist, making arguments like, Palestine doesn't exist, Palestinian people don't exist, there's Judea and Samaria, and all this kind of rhetoric that comes from the Israeli right, hard right, and saying that, basically the propaganda talking points of the Israeli government in terms of his view on Palestine. But I'll just say this, regardless of what you call these people, Palestinians, I call them Palestinians. If you look at the British Mandate period, you look at other points in history, Palestinians and the term Palestine has been there for a very long time. It's not something new. So that is just, categorically false in terms of an accusation or characterization of Palestinians. But the issue is one of land, right? So stay with me on this. Really, the population that has lived on that land for thousands of years, ever since the old biblical times of when, the Jewish people had the Holy Land or resided in the Holy Land, they've had that land, right? Meaning people generationally have lived on that land. And so imagine if someone just shows up and decides to, through the use of force and political will and power, just push you off, steal, take that land using intimidation and all kinds of other ways of manipulation. That's really the essence of the issue of Israel-Palestine, right? So you can call them whatever you want. You can call them Nike. You can call them Adidas. You can call them, people who are browner than other people. You can call them whatever, olive oil, skin people, whatever you want to call them. It doesn't really matter. The point I'm trying to make is that there's people, human beings, who have a basic right to their land that they've inherited generationally, farms, olive farms, citrus farms, you name it. And imagine you've got another group of people, Jews who are immigrating from Europe over the last 70 years, who are basically trying to argue that since they had some biblical claim to it thousands of years ago, that justifies them using this like slow tactic of kind of like an anaconda squeezing its prey, like choking off the Palestinian people to where they keep on getting kicked off and displaced and moved from place to place till they're basically their land rights are absolved and they have to leave. And so it's really that simple. What do you as an American who loves Charlie Kirk, let's say, or loved Charlie Kirk and the Second Amendment think you would do if anyone for any reason showed up and started systematically stealing your land? What would Jesus support is another question I would ask you to think about. Land theft. He was against basic economic exploitation, hence the whole money changers in the temple scene that we all famously, hear about. What about complete land theft and dispossession and ethnic cleansing over a period of time? Land theft of even Christian Palestinians. If you're not aware of this, this is something you need to educate yourself on. There are countless Palestinian Christians, and they suffer similar consequences as their their Muslim counterparts. And it's really something that Tucker Carlson, like I said, Candace Owens, other people on the right are starting to get awareness to and start to call out. But this is just absolutely something we disagree with him on. Another one is that there's no hunger in Gaza. Go watch my interview with wound specialist Ibrahim Barhuma. I think it's the last episode that's on my channel before this one. The medical staff themselves who are operating in these places in Gaza, who are doctors, some of them Western, European trained doctors, highly educated people dedicating their lives to trying to save as many people as possible during this terrible conflict. Their medical staff are weak from lack of food and clean water and are passing out during surgery sometimes. Like, this guy is in touch with these people on the ground on a regular basis, and he is giving detailed testimony. He's been there several times. He's in connection with those people. He knows what the reality is on the ground, and absolutely, without a doubt, there is hunger, famine, lack of water, food. On a regular basis, it's a struggle to get any of those things in Gaza. Palestine is a litmus test, folks, for Western Christian values. You either support systematic land theft and murder for land, or you are against it. It's really that simple. Many Christian conservatives are aware of what's going on and are being, woken up to what the reality is. So I just wanted to bring those points up to make sure that people understand, yeah, absolutely, we disagree with him or disagreed with him on Palestine. Now, where there's room for agreement between us and Charlie Kirk and kind of his legacy, I would say first and foremost, the thing that's probably nearest and dearest to the hearts of Christian conservative Americans is Jesus Christ. And I want to give a few verses from the Quran again that give a picture of what Muslims believe regarding Jesus and Jesus's position in our faith and Abrahamic values in terms of family and society. So to start off, let me just give some verses about Jesus from the Quran. And so go right here. Let's see. Bear with me, folks. So, sorry, not verses about Jesus, but rather verses about some verses about Christians or dealing with Christians and relations between Muslims and Christians in the Quran. So we have Quran chapter 60, verse 8. God does not forbid you to be kind and good and to deal justly with those who have not fought you because of your faith and have not turned you out of your homes. In fact, God loves those who are equitable, meaning there's no reason why you have to have animosity, problems, warfare, violence between you and another people. He says, outside of those who obviously, persecuted you for your faith and turned you out of your homes, meaning those people you've been given permission to use force if necessary in order to deal with them or in defense of those obvious basic human rights that people have. However, the preference or the way to go, if that's not the case, the default is to be equitable and to have good relations. Chapter 2, verse 62, also chapter 2, chapter 5, verse 69, and chapter 22, verse 17. These verses state that those who believe in God, the last day, do good deeds, including Jews, Christians, and others, will have their reward with their Lord and will feel no fear or grief, meaning there's some special status that's allocated towards Christians, Jews, other people that who originally believe in the basic tenets of there being only one God, having monotheism maintained, etc., believing in a day of judgment and a day of having to stand and be accountable for your deeds, that kind of stuff, that they have their own reward and will be compensated accordingly. Chapter 5, verse 82. This verse suggests that Christians are often closest in affection to the believers, meaning the Muslims, due to the presence of devout clergy and monks who are not arrogant. So this is kind of highlighting that the closest are people who are Christian to Muslims because of their emphasis in their faith on humility and on service to fellow man and having this sense of like devotion and life dedicated to God. And then finally, we get to chapter 49, verse 13. O humankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. Indeed, the noblest of you in the sight of God is the most righteous of you, meaning the most pious, the most in character and acts and deeds. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that with people so they understand kind of what Muslims believe in terms of God, in terms of Christians. Now, in terms of Jesus Christ, I would encourage you to look at some of the verses and stories in the Quran about Jesus. I mean, really, we believe that you cannot be Muslim and deny Jesus is our basic, setup of our faith. So we believe in all the prophets. We believe in Jesus was a prophet. That's where the difference is. We don't believe that he was God himself. We believe that God is only God, meaning the God that we can't see, the God that's in heaven, that is above everything, transcendent God. But we do believe that Jesus Christ performed miracles with the help of God. We believe that Jesus Christ was righteous. It plays a critical role in the end times. All that stuff Muslims share with Christians. And we believe that Jesus Christ is venerated and was born of miraculous virgin birth. We believe that Jesus Christ, like I said, performed miracles. He turned a bird made out of clay into a living bird by the will of God. He healed the lepers, the blind. Those kinds of things are definitely in our canon of knowledge. And so another area that we also have room for agreement on. So I just hope that you guys understand that there is room for agreement. Obviously, there's disagreement in terms of the divinity of Jesus, the Trinity. We don't believe in the Trinity, but it's not to say that we have to, have some kind of perpetual animosity with each other because of these belief differences, right? I think if we're being level-headed and reasonable, we need to focus on where the areas of agreement are, where we can be productive in moving our country and our society forward in a positive way. Also, on the transgender issue, I would say there's a lot of agreement between Muslims and Christians, or Charlie Kirk, let's say, conservatives. The transgender issue, like Muslims, high level, there's a lot of detail here I won't get into, but we believe that, people are born male or female. There are men and there are women. Could there be occasional instances due to like a anomalous birth where someone has both chromosomes, or someone is hermaphroditic or whatever it's called. Sorry if I'm butchering these terms, but yes, we recognize science, we recognize all those things. However, we really do, I think, align more in terms of like traditional gender roles. However, I think the difference would be in terms of tone and tenor. Like, I think in American Muslim community is much more open-minded to like this concept of like, people need to be respected in terms of who they are. And not everyone walks the same path or lives in other people's shoes to know what it's like to be born with a certain sensibility or feeling, or to somehow feel like you're out of place in your body, gender, dysmorphia or whatever it's called. All those things are things that we're open to understanding. But in general, I think we align very much in terms of men and women being, what they are born as. And the default is that, men shouldn't play in women's sports, and that in general, these are, separation of the sexes in certain things is important. When it comes to abortion, Muslims, I would say, would align more closely with Christian America or conservative Christian America in terms of abortion and the values around that. There's some nuance to that, but it's the daylight is very, very minimal between us. Gun control, again, I think that there are a group of Muslims who really are big on gun control, but then also I would challenge those people myself personally and say that there is definitely tradition within our religion of the idea that you should teach your kids these core things, and among them that was mentioned by the Prophet Muhammad, aside from being able to swim, one of them, and being able to drive or ride a horse or ride a camel, meaning today's context would be drive. The other one would be to be able to use a sword or a bow and arrow, or use some kind of weapon of hunting or self-defense. And so I think there are a lot of Muslims who are very big on, enjoying the Second Amendment safely and responsibly, and respecting and understanding its importance, especially given, the fear of everything turning to authoritarianism and a lot of the world falling into that. And I do agree with Charlie Kirk in that societies that are armed and have guns are probably much safer in terms of an authoritarian hellscape occurring in their country than countries where the citizenry is completely defenseless and unarmed. Feminism, I think there's a huge emphasis in Islam and Muslim culture on the role of the mother, the importance of a mother in terms of raising kids, raising the family, the next generation, and having a quality person in that role that's worthy of that responsibility as you're forging the future of your people. So I think feminism is not completely antithetical. I think there's a big debate within the Muslim community around a lot of these topics, so I'm giving very broad strokes, but so forgive me for that. But there's definitely things within Islam that I think are very much feminist and pro, like, in a traditional feminist sense, like pro women's freedom and rights and protection. But then there are other things that I think, like the emphasis on motherhood and the importance and sanctity of that role, are really, really pivotal for Muslims. And then I'd say economic exploitation, right? So like Islam is against usury, meaning the charging of interest or exorbitant amounts of interest in a way that enslaves people economically. Economic exploitation is a huge thing that Islam and Muslims are against. And so you'll find a lot of common value and interest around that topic as well. In closing, I know that was a lot, folks. Bear with me, but there's a lot of important information that I just want to get out there. A message to Christian conservative America. This is more from me, just my take. We share so much more in common than we have cause for animosity, fear, or hatred on. I'll give you a basic example here. So we come to, again, there are these verses in the Quran that are always talking about, like, help each other in doing good things. Don't help each other in doing evil things, right? So collaborate or help and work together towards that which is righteous, towards the righteous deeds. Don't collaborate and work together on things that increase, evil and mischief and transgression in the land. And so I would just appeal to everyone to please think about our common shared interests. We really have no reason for us to have animosity, fear, and hatred, and let that kind of rule the day. There's so much more that we can build together in a positive way, in a positive direction, if we look at what's in front of us that's shared and common, that can improve the country and our society. We should put our energy together and collaborate on making America and the world the best place we possibly can. I want to also mention the danger of extreme ideologies and fringe groups. In Islam, even in our religion, we have this concept of like being weary or careful of extremist ideologies and fringe groups. I know some people might be chuckling, thinking like, well, hey, you guys are all the extremists or Muslim and this and that. But again, if you've listened to anything I've said, hopefully by now you realize that that's just like, a cheap characterization or shot against Islam and Muslims as a group, based on a few, examples of extremists in very much dysfunctional countries across the world that have so many problems. I need an entire podcast episode just to talk about like where extremism comes from in the Muslim world, in other countries that you see. Why does it come up? What's the difference between those people and other mainstream Muslims? That's a whole nother topic. But what I'll say is, extreme ideologies, whether religious ideologies, fringe ideologies that are very much, almost antagonistic or contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. We're always cautioned about those, right? So yes, there could be a new idea that gets introduced from some fringe thing that is revolutionary for its time and then ultimately becomes the mainstream way, hence the need for freedom of speech. But in general, very fringe things need to be looked at skeptically and carefully, and you need to assess them with wisdom and caution before you fully accept them and integrate them into your overall programming, right? So this is something that's happened in the Middle East for a long time. And I don't want to get into all the details because I don't have time, but it can tear a society apart, right? So if America goes down the path of focusing on the extreme ideology and focusing on the fringe stuff, I think it can really tear the fabric of America apart and cause a lot of possibly pain and suffering and violence in the future. And this is what I think a lot of people are realizing and are afraid of. And I really am encouraging everyone listening to try to steer us back on course and have a part in play a part in steering the country back on course through your own personal lives and interactions with other people, other Americans. the amount of division and fear that could be created and the way people can exploit that to achieve their own political objectives is truly, scary and shocking. We need the 90% who are kind of the level-headed adults in the room, as I keep saying, to move everyone in a better direction, to step up and to show true leadership and character during this very divisive, very troubling time. The lesson from Charlie Kirk's killing in terms of American foreign policy that I want to share is that think about how shocking and just jolting this experience has been for you with Charlie Kirk being killed. Imagine how many times, go look it up if you need to, how many times this has happened in other countries where people in those countries, whether South America, whether the Middle East, whether, whatever, were supporting a leader, a young, vibrant soul who emerged from poverty most of the time, got an education, became really, capable in terms of being able to explain and express the problems of their society, their day, their country, their context in a very eloquent way. How many times those people have risen up in these countries across the world and then their lives have been snuffed out because of foreign policy of the United States, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, CIA, regime change operations, capacity building, all that stuff that you've seen probably on podcasts nowadays or all over the place. Think about how many times other countries and societies have gone through that and never see anything else, right? So Charlie Kirk was an icon, I think, right, for a lot of people of our time, of our political discourse. And I just can't tell you how many times someone like that, but for a different society, a different segment of a different society have popped up, promising to deliver those people from their problems, their challenges, rescue them from the brink of whatever they're headed as a country or as a people. And then those people who could have been the real change makers, the real innovators, the real leaders to move their country in a better direction were killed, assassinated, a lot of times due to our own government, deep state meddling in those countries, or because we wanted the price of bananas to be cheaper, or the price of raw minerals for our phones, or oil, or whatever it might be, right? And so, our foreign policy is creating failed countries through these acts that we've committed that are similar to what was committed against Charlie Kirk, but just slightly in a different context. And those failed countries are producing refugees, people who cannot live the way they need to live to enjoy themselves as a full human being and their rights and their privileges and their dreams and hopes and everything else that we as Americans value so highly. They can't live that out in their home countries because of the systems being pretty much an authoritarian, hellscape, for lack of a better term, as Americans would consider it, just for some of those things, that basic rights that we enjoy that they don't. And those people are expected to just live their lives out under those systems. Well, guess what? A lot of young people say, you know what, screw that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave. I'm going to try my luck in another country and see if I can escape that system that's been put there to just basically keep us down. And guess what? Instability is created, both in those countries as well as in Western countries, as we're seeing with all the influx of refugees and during like the Syrian civil war, the crisis of people coming across into Europe through Greece and across the Mediterranean and just, dumping themselves at the shores of these Western countries. And you see the backlash, right? People, I think a lot of conservatives as well, Charlie Kirkers as well, saying, why are all these people coming over here? These people need to go back to their home countries, blah, blah, blah. I'm not here to debate immigration policy, but and I do think that every country needs a sensible legal immigration policy, of course. But if you want to root cause this, right, you need to understand the overall cycle and the circle that is created of violence that produces these results, and the role that our government, as taxpayers in the United States of America, our government has in creating these patterns. So in closing, I know that was a lot. I tried to keep it really short this time compared to past monologues, but I would encourage everyone, Muslim Americans, non-Muslim Americans, Charlie Kirk fans, non-Charlie Kirk fans, everyone across the political spectrum, to please calm the overall tone of the conversation down. bring the temperature down. Choose love, choose patience, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and grace over fear, hatred, anger, and violence. And if we do this, I think we can take something that is definitely a huge negative, a huge crime, a huge sad, stain on the history of our time, and will be remembered as such, I'm sure, for many, 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 many years to come. And we can turn it into something, hopefully, that wakes us up and jolts us to something better and more positive and to a brighter future for us and our children. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and also share this episode or another episode that that resonates with you or that you find impactful or interesting with people in your circles or social media. And thank you for listening. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day all.